I'm delighted to report that I have joined as a scholar the Declaration of Independence Center for the Study of American Freedom at the University of Mississippi. The center offers educational opportunities, speakers, internship, and reading groups for the University of Mississippi community. It is named in honor of the United States founding document, which constitutes the nation as a political community and expresses fundamental principles of American freedom, including in the recognition of the importance of Judeo-Christian values in shaping American exceptionalism. Dedicated to the academic and open-minded exploration of these principles, the center exists to encourage exploration into the many facets of freedom. It will sponsor a speaker series and an interdisciplinary faculty research team. If you'd like to learn more about the center, please visit OleMiss, that's OLEMISS.edu/independence/. Hey everybody, this is Scott Saad. Today I've got a rare guest in that he is part of the elite group of three-peats. He has been on my show not once, not twice, but three times. So he must be sufficiently interesting to come back for a third time. Dinesh D'Souza, how you doing, sir?
Very good. I thought you were going to commend me for going to Dartmouth or working in the Reagan White House or making all these award-winning films, but no, I'm being commended here for meeting the standard of coming back on the show three times. I'll take it.
Those other things that you mentioned, while impressive, are not nearly as impressive as retaining my interest for three times. We did talk the first time that you came here that we actually share a Dartmouth link. You may not remember this. I was a visiting professor at Tuck School of Business in 2002, and we did discuss both your Reagan associations the first time you were on, and I don't think the second time. The second time, I think it was Vindicating Trump that we were talking about.
Yeah.
But today we're here to discuss your most recent documentary, which just recently dropped, which is called The Dragon's Prophecy. For those of you who want to go check it out, I'm going to spell it out for you. The Dragons with an S without an apostrophe, prophecyfilm.com. The dragonsprophecyfilm.com. Go check it out. Why don't we start there and then we'll expand to wherever we need to go. Take it away, Dinesh.
Well, the film is unusual for me because my earlier films, in one way or another, have always been about the meaning of America. And typically my approach is to combine a political and an historical analysis and try to pull the two together. In this film, I cover October 7th, Israel, Hamas, radical Islam, but I also cover biblical archaeology and biblical prophecy. So this is a film that integrates the political and the biblical in a kind of, at least for me, new way. And it is a film that tries to understand the events occurring around us through a very wide-angled lens that touches on the ancient past, but also projects into the future. The name, The Dragon's Prophecy, refers to an image in the book of Revelation where a dragon, representing the devil, attacks a woman, representing Israel, and the woman is pregnant, representing, at least in Christian terms, the Messiah. So that is the kind of broad landscape that the film explores.
Well, it's interesting that you use the imagery sort of the male, devil, the female, because in my conversations with Muslims, Arabic is my mother tongue. I've said before that they've often told me that the West is so feminized that it is akin to a woman to be mounted. And so it is interesting that we sort of see this same kind of imagery from biblical times to today. Now, there is someone, at least for the biblical part, as you explained to me offline, that your work is based on a book by Jonathan Cahn. Maybe we could briefly discuss that and then drill down in the book, in the documentary.
Sure. Let me get at it in a slightly different way.
Sure.
The way I developed an interest in all of this, I went to Israel for the first time in 2022, and I was exposed to some of these remarkable findings in biblical archaeology in the last 20 or 30 years. Now, you have all these figures in the Bible. Some of them are in the New Testament, people like Pontius Pilate or the high priest named Caiaphas. But if you go further back, 6th or 7th century BC, the prophet Jeremiah, a little earlier, the prophet Isaiah, around 1000 BC, King David. Now, these are figures that, let's say 50 years ago, if somebody were to say, prove to me not using the Bible that these are real historical figures, you couldn't do it. But what's happened in the last few decades, coming out of the ground, artifacts, inscriptions, pieces of monuments, clay seals, and what they're doing is they are authenticating some of these remarkable figures in the Hebrew and the Christian scriptures who are jumping, you can say, out of the Bible and into the pages of history via the pathway of archaeology. So I became intrigued by all this. And then comes October 7th. And I see October 7th, when I realized that this is something that Hamas filmed for itself, and they broadcast it, they were proud of it. I realize you're dealing with a dimension here of human evil. It's very difficult for us to grasp the full psychology of it. It defies, you could say, natural explanation. And so I was thinking about that. Then along comes this fellow, Jonathan Cahn, and he makes to me some very sort of startling and interesting observations. He says, look, this battle that you're seeing right here in front of you between Israel and Hamas, he goes, this is a replay of ancient battles described in the Old Testament between the Israelites and a group called the Philistines. So the ancient Israelites fought a lot of different people, the Amalekites and the Canaanites, but their most determined enemy, the Philistines. The name Philistine and Palestine is, I don't have to tell you, God, it's the same name, it's the same word transported through time. Now, where Khan really excels is he says it's not a matter of the name. He says it's a matter of the tactics. They are, in fact, remarkably the same. And he gives the example of the biblical character called Samson. So Samson represents the strength of Israel. He's captured by the Philistines. He is blinded in somewhat of the same way that Israel was, quote, blinded on October 7th. He is dragged, according to the Bible, to Gaza. So the Philistines occupy an area that was then called Philistia, made up of 5 cities, the chief one, Gaza. So here's Samson in Gaza, and the Bible says the people of Gaza demanded, strip him down and bring him out so he can entertain us. And sure enough, after October 7th, you had captives stripped to the waist, brought out in an exhibitionistic fashion, and you have people cheering and yelling, Allahu Akbar. And so Jonathan Cahn says in a very sort of bland, but I think powerful way in the film, he goes, Samson can be seen as the first hostage of Gaza. So what I found interesting about all this is simply its evocative nature, the ability of this guy, and I'm only giving you the glimpse of it, of drawing these parallels. Even though he seems to be speaking, quote, prophetically, it's not like he's conjecturing about the future. He's actually looking at the remote past, and he's drawing out threads of similarity. And I thought, this is something I haven't heard before. It gives me a more wide-angle lens to think about all this. Let me import, at least for purposes of thoughtful consideration, some of this into the film, and then I'll buttress it by the archaeology. Why? Because I want to address skeptics who go, well, yeah, Dinesh, this is all very interesting, but how do we know that these biblical figures were even real?
Right, beautiful. So now you talk about this, the sort of similarity in the template that was used back in those biblical times versus now. But one thing that wasn't around in the biblical time, I mean, at least in an official sense, was what is the current sort of ideology driving the hate towards the Jews, which would be Islam. Is there a link that you could identify between the ideology that was animating the biblical era hatred and the current hatred that is very much rooted in Islamic doctrines?
So the argument here is going to go in a somewhat unexpected direction. It's not going to try to show that the Philistines and Islam, which of course comes out of the Arabian desert in the 7th century, sort of share the same principles. It goes more like this, that there is a primordial war between good and evil, between God and the devil, that has been raging since the beginning of time. Now, the underlying sort of theology of this goes like this, that the devil is not strong enough to overthrow God. And so the devil adopts a different strategy. It is to find the things that God cares about and try to ruin them. So, for example, in Genesis 1, 2, and 3, why does the serpent choose Adam and Eve, right? Adam and Eve have done nothing to the serpent in the story, but the idea is that the serpent wants revenge on God. And if Adam and Eve are the cherished creation of God, let me go ruin them. And in that, I get the last laugh on God. This is, by the way, very much the way Milton reads it in Paradise Lost. The same logic can be applied to the Jews. If the Jews are the chosen people of God, the devil says, you know what? Let me run them out of their ancestral land from the river to the sea. Not only that, let me take their holiest site, which is the Solomonic Temple, and let me put an Islamic victory arch on top of that, called the Dome of the Rock, with the Al-Aqsa Mosque next to it. And not only that, let me now go to the other group that came out of the Jews, the so-called spiritual Israelites. This is what Jonathan Cahn calls us Christians. And the devil goes, let me go after them too. And so, according to Khan, the Bible is forecasting that there's going to be a rising, vehement attack, both physical, by the way, as well as cultural and moral, on the Jews and on the Christians. And this is, in fact, God, what we see in the world today. So we're not just talking about idle speculation. We're saying that empirically, it is true that we see more military attacks on Israel, more beheading of Christians, but not only that, an attack on Jews and Christians inside of the West that is coming from the cultural left and in some cases from the cultural right, which has reached a vehemence that I don't think you or I would have predicted even 5 years ago.
Well, this bifurcation of hate towards the Christians and the Jews is, as you probably know, captured or encapsulated within a saying in the Middle East. First, we come for the Saturday people, then we come for the Sunday people. That exactly speaks to what you're talking about. But let me ask you this. So if we're we can discuss this without invoking any spiritual, theological elements, right? There is an objectively a society that corresponds to Western values more so than the others. But since we're talking sort of from a spiritual, theological perspective, how do you explain, Dinesh, the fact that you have Christians that are fully committed in their support for Israel, as you might be, right? Let's call them Christian Zionists. But then you've got other Christians, regrettably, many of whom send me hate mail, that are fully vested in their hatred of Jews and of Israel in a manner that makes it almost indistinguishable for me to know whether it's the most rabid Muslims that are attacking me or Christians. So how do we square the circle where you have two sets of people, both Christians, that arrive at perfectly inconsistent conclusions regarding their position vis-a-vis Israel?
Right. So there is you could call it a mainstream or Orthodox Christian position that has been held by Catholics and Protestants for the larger part of 2,000 years. In fact, it goes back to an early meeting described in the book of Acts, where the Apostle Paul, now Paul is a Jew, as are all Jesus's apostles, but Paul is the missionary to the Gentiles, to the non-Jews. And so the apostles are getting a little annoyed at Paul because these Gentiles are not following Jewish customs. And the apostles' view is, wait a minute, Jesus was one of us. You need to become Jewish first, and then you can sort of accept Jesus as your Messiah. So there's a showdown between Paul and the apostles, and they come to an agreement. And the agreement is that the Gentiles do not have to be circumcised. They do not have to keep the Sabbath. They don't have to follow some of the rites and rituals and dietary rules, but they have to do all the rest. So in other words, they have to otherwise adopt the Hebrew scriptures from Genesis through the fallenness of human nature to the Ten Commandments to the Exodus to the teachings of the Psalms and the prophets. All of that stays. And this has been the Christian position consistently. So what's happening now, which I think is being promoted by certain people, including Tucker, is a very sly reinterpretation. And the sly reinterpretation is this, that when Jesus came, the Old Testament became obsolete. There's now a new covenant which, quote, replaces the old. This is the meaning of the term replacement theology. And therefore, essentially, we don't need the Old Testament. The Jews rejected Christ, and therefore they are now in turn rejected by God. So this is, I want to emphasize that the people who say all this, they pretend like they are fighting against a Protestant idea called dispensationalism. But in reality, they are fighting with what C.S. Lewis called mere Christianity. They're fighting with the mainstream of Christianity going back 2,000 years. So this is just giving you, I don't know how interested you are in any of this, but this is a window into the internecine theological debate around all this. The bottom line of it, though, is that the Christian position has always been, and by the way, it's in contrast to, I'm told that in Islam, you have a doctrine called abrogation, in which later verses can cancel out earlier verses. There's no such thing in Christianity. There's no abrogation. The New Testament does not abrogate the old. Jesus does not abrogate the old. He fulfills it. So I'm giving you, God, I've been a sort of a Christian apologist. I wrote a book called What's So Great About Christianity. I've debated Hitchens and Dawkins and Dennett and Shermer and so on. I'm very familiar with the mainstream Christian position, which I'm defending now. So yes, it has been very disturbing to me that in the name of Christianity, we are seeing these bizarre twistings of Christian teaching used to justify really a very ugly anti-Semitism of the right.
Samuel Huntington, as you know, talked about sort of the civilizational conflicts. Islam has a bloody borders. Now, there are several, again, I want to couch it in the context of a theological battle, precisely because that is part of the element of your documentary. So, for example, if you take Ayaan Hirsi Ali, who left Islam, became an atheist, and then became a Christian, one of the arguments that she has made, and that's what I was going to ask you about, is that, well, look, it's very difficult when you're having this big struggle with Islam that seems to be incongruent with a lot of the values that we hold as deontological principles in the West. It's very difficult for people to come at it from a place of non-belief. And so having, in a sense, Christianity, it was harder for her, or try to convince others to fight against Islam from a non-belief position. It makes it easier and more palpable if you are yourself anchored and rooted in a competing religious, set of doctrines. Do you believe that that's true, or do you? Because I mean, on the one hand, I fully understand that, but on the other hand, there might be other people who are fully understanding of the dangers of Islam who may not be willing to, accept Jesus in their hearts prior to fighting Islam. What are your views on that debate?
So to me, I would put it this way, that there is, as we know, this very peculiar alliance between the sort of LGBTQ cultural left on the one side and the radical jihadis on the other. These are two groups that cannot coexist in each other's worlds, as you know all too well. But nevertheless, they are united, I would say, by a common hatred. So what is that hatred toward? Well, it's toward the Jews and Israel on the one side and Christians and the West on the other. And so it makes strategic sense for the Jews and the Christians, or to put it more generally in nationalistic terms, for Israel and the United States and the West, to come closer together to meet and resist this threat. What the film says is that just as the Jews are putting on the armor, in some cases the physical armor, the IDF, as in ancient times when you went out to battle with the Philistines, so too Christians today need to put on some spiritual armor. Why? Because if you think about it, these radical jihadis, for them, Islam has not lost the force of its original revelation. But for a lot of Christians, it has. And so the Christians need to sort of armor up, if you will, but in a moral and a theological sense. By the way, when I was at Charlie Kirk's, funeral, this was the talk of that event, namely the need for spiritual restoration and strengthening of our society. Now, I would pull back from all of that and say, look, a lot of my brain is secular. A lot of my work operates in the secular realm. So my ultimate arguments for all this don't rest upon some interpretation of the book of Revelation. They rest on somewhat more prosaic grounds. I would say, for example, hey, look, Israel is really good at fighting radical Islam. We are not. Let's look at our record. You know, America, Jimmy Carter pulled out the Persian rug from under the Shah. We got Khomeini. We helped radical Islam get a hold of a major state. Fast forward to 9/11, we expelled the Taliban. Pretty spectacular, but a couple of decades later, they're back. Obviously, the Iraq War was handled very poorly. So the American record of dealing with these jihadis, I would say, checkered at best. Israel is on the front line. They operate in a survival mode. And I think as a result, there's a leanness about them. Kind of like a guy who lives in a bad neighborhood who learns to look over his shoulder. He's a little bit more prepared for danger than some guy who lives like in a gated community. So what I'm getting at is there are good strategic reasons for us to ally with Israel. They actually are on the front line of this fight and they know what they're doing. That's point number one. Point number two, which I think will resonate with you, is this. The philosopher Leo Strauss says that Western civilization is built on the two pillars of Athens and Jerusalem. And you can see that these pillars have given Western civilization very different things. So from Athens, we get classical reason. We get Socrates, the idea of the gadfly, of free speech, the Greek theater, Pericles and the idea of self-government and democracy. But from Jerusalem, we also get a lot. We get the idea of rights, of divine creation as the basis for rights. All men are created equal. We get the idea of a moral law that in the universe that exists independently of us, that makes claims on us, the Ten Commandments being a sort of reflection of that. We get the wisdom of the book of Ecclesiastes. We get problems explored in Job and suffering. We get the teachings of the Hebrew prophets. So I don't think our civilization would have become as strong as it has without being, you could say, supported by both pillars. It cannot survive on only one of those two pillars. And so for this reason, I think that Jerusalem needs to be defended even by secular people because it is a foundation of the values that we hold most dear.
Beautiful. I actually had recently one of the two co-authors of a 2-volume set that's coming out. First volume came out already called The Golden Thread. It's by two historians, one from Harvard, the other from Princeton. I interviewed on my show the Harvard historian. His name is James Hankins, and so he talks about the golden thread that links all of these different periods, whether it be Jerusalem and the Hellenic world and subsequent periods after that. Do you think so? When I look at Israel, and I actually recently had the former director of Mossad on my show, and I know that you recently spoke as part of the documentary. The Dragon's Prophecy, go check it out, people. You spoke to Prime Minister Netanyahu. I raised this question with the director of the Mossad, but I wonder if you raised a similar point, namely that there seems to be a lagging ability between Israel's capacity to fight in kinetic wars, where they are formidable, and in my view, a less than as good ability to fight in the propaganda wars. In that, you sort of look at these guys, say, you have some of the brightest people that one could ever imagine, and as manifested in a million different ways. And yet, when I wake up every day and I see, so who's winning here, the propaganda war? And it's more than just the fact that it's 125 Muslims to 1 Jews in the world. It's more than just sheer numbers. Did you discuss that? If yes, maybe you could tell us what was discussed. And if not, whether yes or no, what are your thoughts on this? Do you agree that Israel is not as good with its IDF soldiers as it is with its propaganda soldiers?
Yes, I would call this, and this is my view, not Netanyahu's view. What I focused on with Netanyahu, by the way, was Tucker Carlson's question, which was Tucker says that that essentially the Jews of today are sort of imposters, that they're not really the descendants of and so Netanyahu, I think, gives a very elegant dunking on Tucker in the film. But I want to answer your question, which is I would call it the conundrum of the well-meaning decent guy. And by the way, this could be also, you can also use this framework to understand why Republicans until very recently have been in a bad situation, because precisely they have not taken the measure of who they are up against. They think that the people that they're up against are sort of dumb, or that they don't get it, and they set themselves the educational task of raising their consciousness, whereas the people who they're up against may be like downright evil, and are, so it's like trying to convince the guy robbing the bank that this is not a good idea, because if everybody robbed banks, the banks wouldn't really have any money. People would not trust banks. The bank robber doesn't care about any of that. He just cares, is there money in the safe? Is there gold in the safe deposit box? Can I get a hold of it? So you have to know what you're dealing with. Now, here's what I mean. If Israel had, if Israel understood the propaganda stakes, they would have released the footage of October 7th on October 8th. They chose not to do that. A very significant decision. I understand why they made it. But
why?
They made it because they said out of respect to the families. So that was their justification. But look, 2 years later, I've been on a Telegram channel collecting this footage for 2 years. It's the first 10 minutes of my film. I mean, I put you right on the scene. And people have told me, they're like, this is the most powerful opening of a movie since like Saving Private Ryan, because, with the difference, of course, that I didn't stage it. It's real. Now, the other thing is that had Israel carpet bombed Gaza on October 8th, nobody could have said anything. Right on the heels of October 7th, Israel could have gotten away with it. So then the question becomes, why didn't they do it? Well, the answer is Israel decided, we're not that type of people. We're not just going to go carpet bomb them. We now have to make a plan, and we have to target Hamas. And this is going to make some additional risks to our soldiers because, of course, Hamas is embedded in the society. So Israel then sort of goes to the blueprints. They create a battle strategy. They create a supportive political structure for that. But what happens, of course, is that the bad guys, and this is, by the way, the nature of evil. The nature of evil is not just that the bad guys do bad things. It's that the bad guys figure out a way to make the good guys have to do bad things, so the bad guy can then point that out and discredit the good guy by his own standard, right? Isn't that exactly what's going on here?
Exactly.
So Hamas, I think, anticipated Israel will strike back. And Hamas said, all right, we'll be ready for them when they do. We'll be holding our wives and children in front of us. We're going to dare them to shoot. The moment they do shoot, we will call on our massive propaganda apparatus around the world to amplify these war crimes. And we're going to ultimately take the aggressor, us, and make us the victim. We're going to take the victim, Israel, and make it the aggressor. And we're going to sort of turn the world upside down. We're going to turn the narrative on its head. And wow, if they haven't fully succeeded, they've certainly made tremendous headway, as you and I both know.
Hey, it's funny that you say this, because yesterday my wife and I were chatting, and she goes, what was the point of all this? They got nothing out of this, Hamas. I said, what do you mean they got nothing? There has been an orgiastic increase in global Jew hatred. It is the biggest win that one could ever have hoped for. Even by their lofty, diabolical standards, they couldn't have hoped for anything like this. So I think...
Well, one more thing about that, adding to your point. Look, they almost got the leaders of the Western world unanimously to declare the imperative of a Palestinian state, right? They succeeded with Albanese in Australia. They succeeded with Keir Starmer. They succeeded with Macron. They succeeded in Canada. So it was only Trump who sort of took it away from them, right? If we had a normal, conventional politician in America, even Republican, they would be tempted to be carried by this tide. But I think what happened with Trump was that he outwitted them at the last minute, in the very kind of peculiar way that Trump comes to these things. You know, there's an element of, I mean, comedy is the wrong word here, but it's almost like Trump is coming to Gaza like a real estate guy. And he's like, I don't like all this rubble. I don't see why there can't be some buildings and some nice apartments, maybe a Trump Tower, people going to work, prosperity, high-tech companies. But I think the underlying idea is to offer another way. And I think the genius of it is to bring in the Muslim countries to support that. That is Trump's, you wouldn't think he would be capable of that kind of a diplomatic accomplishment, but I think you do have to give him some credit for pulling that off. I've seen, and you've seen going back, Nixon had a plan and Carter had a plan. There was a Clinton plan. This implausible guy, Trump, has gotten further down the road than any of those guys did.
Do you feel so? You're obviously a historian of certainly U.S. presidents. You're an expert on certainly on Reagan and so on. Do you, notwithstanding the Trump derangement syndrome, that of course so many of the existing historians who are all leftist would say that he remains worse than Himmler and Hitler combined. Do you think that in 10, 15, 20, 40 years, people will look back at Trump and place him, maybe it's hyperbolic to say Mount Rushmore, but is he this kind of historical figure from your perspective?
Well, as I look at the landscape of American history, it looks to me like, by and large, in each century, you have 2, maybe 3 guys who really stand out above the rest. You can obviously find that in the 18th century with, say, Washington, for example, and Jefferson. In the 19th century, again, Lincoln. Go a little further back, maybe Madison. Perhaps Andrew Jackson, that's a little more debatable. 20th century, you'd say the 2 leading figures, probably without a doubt, FDR and Reagan. And again, you might dispute, but you can't dispute their significance, that they shaped a whole era. The Reagan era, in my view, basically went from 1980 to 2008 when Obama was elected. Obama started to inaugurate a kind of a new era. But I think even though Obama's effect, I think mainly for the worse, has been a lot. So Obama is a consequential figure. Obama sort of met his match in Trump. And I think this is part of why the guy has been scowling ever since. He had a very grudging post just
I saw it
recently about, he couldn't even bring himself to say the name Trump because, so I think that Trump is emerging as the sort of larger than life figure of our time. I think even the critics, they would have to admit that, even if they think that he's a villainous figure, I think they would have to agree that he is a kind of a consequential figure. So I think history will take note of him. I don't think you can judge the effects of a president until after their presidency. So the full measure of it would have to be taken after the second term. But I think we can already see that this guy is creating some very important legacies, both domestic and on the foreign policy front. He doesn't need a Nobel Prize. But the funny thing about Trump reminds me a little bit of the ancient Greeks, because in the world of the ancient Greeks, everything was measured by external recognition. For Achilles, he wanted people to talk about him, and that's what immortality meant in the ancient world. You would never hear Achilles say something like, I know that I am the greatest Greek warrior of all time. I don't care what other people say. Trump is Achilles in that sense. For Trump, if he does a peace accomplishment, it's like, where's my Nobel Prize? He needs the scorecard. He needs the, he's all about ratings and audiences and winning. And winning for him involves acknowledgement and physical trophies. So there's a kind of very intriguing element about Trump. There's a part about him, I think, that comes right out of the ancient world.
I agree. And I think Victor Davis Hanson, who is a classicist, has made similar comparisons between specific ancient Greek historical figures and exactly what you just said. So spot on. Do you feel that, Trump is a one-off in that the unique combination that constitutes the eventual personhood called Donald Trump is truly unique. But of course, there could be certain principles, within MAGA and so on, that could be, the baton can be passed down. Do you feel confident that, whether it be J.D. Vance or whether it be Mark Rubio or anybody else who may, come forward for the next election, are you feeling confident, or are you worried, boy, we've got 3 more years to get this once in a lifetime set of changes done, and no one ever is going to match the ability of Trump to be an agent of change?
No, I think that Trump is, I would compare Trump a little bit to Moses in the sense that he is a larger than life, but nevertheless somewhat transitional figure. And by that I mean he represents the transition away from the old Republican Party to the new. He also represents a redefinition of the scope of American politics, which is now calculated sort of within the terms of America First, within the terms of MAGA. Even my defense of Israel is within the scope of America First. It's good for America to have friends and allies, and we need to be able to distinguish the good guys from the bad guys. And we should be asking what Israel can do for us, just as Israel should ask what can America do for us. But Trump is not all that ideological about it. So right now, Trump's view is MAGA is spelled Trump. And Trump also has this view, which I think is fairly unique, at least in my lifetime, that America is like a big corporation. It's like America LLC. He's the CEO. And so he doesn't hesitate to say things like, I want a percentage of Intel. He doesn't mean for him. He means for the taxpayer. So his constituents become kind of shareholders it's really a fascinating sort of, but it's very Trumpian. I don't see either Rubio or say J.D. Vance going in that direction because that direction is too sui generis with Trump. However, these are the figures that are going to have to work out the next phase of MAGA, which is going to be less hooked on personality and more driven by a coherent set of ideas. The reason I think people like Tucker and so on are fighting so hard, they want to take over the ideological trajectory of MAGA post-Trump. That's really what it's all about. They're trying to browbeat a J.D. Vance. I don't think they can browbeat Marco Rubio, but they're trying with Vance. And Tucker, his son, works, I believe, for Vance. They're trying to basically create a post-Trump MAGA that veers in their direction. And people like me are trying to stop them.
Have you had any conversations that you can share or give a synopsis with Tucker post the new Tucker? I mean, like, I knew Tucker well. I don't know how well you knew him, but I've been on his show many times. I've been to his studio in Florida. We met. He met my family, and then something happened. Have you had a chance to sit down with him and say, "Hey, what's going on, buddy? Let's chat"?
When I posed, as I mentioned, when I was in Australia with him last year, this topic never came up. It was cordial dealings with Tucker, but we were both speaking about things like COVID, and we were talking about the police state and political targeting, and these sorts of issues. But when I posed the question that Tucker raised with Ted Cruz to Netanyahu, and I was about to post the answer on X, a clip, I thought, out of courtesy, I better send it to Tucker. I don't want him to feel like I'm ambushing him. Right. So I'll send it to him like, hey, I did what a good journalist would do. I took your question to Netanyahu. And then Tucker sent me this very irritable text basically saying, genetic studies, Dinesh, show that the Jews of today are only like 68% related to the ancient Israelites. And I sort of was like, I'm thinking to myself, first of all, with any other group, nobody would think of doing this. Like, I could do studies on blacks in America and say that they're not really from Africa because look at Whitney Houston. She's basically, cream coffee colored. And so she's obviously got a considerable admixture of white. And so do many other blacks. In fact, the majority, blacks in America don't look like blacks in Africa. So they're not, quote, descended from. So I'm like, but Tucker, you'd never do that because in 30 seconds, you'd be run out of town for starters. So why is it okay for you to single out the Jews in this way? I mean, the French today don't exactly resemble the French, let's just say, of the Crusades, let alone the French going much further back. All groups have some elements of conversion, of admixture over many, many centuries. The Jews, by and large, have been more cohesive as a tribe than just about any other group. So I went back and forth with Tucker 8 or 9 times on this topic. I've never released those texts because I thought this is private correspondence, but it gave me an insight into the fact that I'm like, this guy is like gone, you know?
But what's driving his goneness, if I can put it this way? Some have said, oh, it's, the usual sort of conspiratorial, it's Qatari money. Is that, I mean, or has he been parasitized, to use my own framework? What is driving him falling into that abyss?
Tucker is very well off. He obviously has tremendous earning capacity given his celebrity. He doesn't really need the Qatari money to be rich. I have difficulty believing that that is the sole factor, and I've never even gone down that direction because I don't know it to be even true. Tucker at one point said something very interesting, which is, and this again is pulling us into the realm of the theological, and he was not kidding. He said that he was attacked by a demon. And he said that the demon got the better of him and scratched his body and face. So he was actually wounded by this demon. So I was on Roseanne Barr's show. We were talking about this, and I'm like, Roseanne, we were talking about motives. And I said, I can look at the effects of what Tucker is doing, but I can't probe his motives. And Roseanne goes, he was attacked by a demon. The demon got him. And I go, and Roseanne goes, I know the name of the demon. I'm like, what's his name? And she said, I forget now, like it's Balak or something like that. And evidently there is a named demon that is in the Hebrew scriptures. I wasn't familiar with it, but in any event, I do think to me, when it first started, I thought, look, Tucker is being a habitual iconoclast, but he's being an iconoclast in a juvenile way, right? I try to be an iconoclast, but I try to be an iconoclast with ideas, with facts, with history. And I'm like, this is a parody of what it means to be an iconoclast. In the same way that, say, Candace's, quote, investigations are a parody of, like, Columbo, right? She's conducting a, quote, personal investigation. She recruits her minions to be kind of delegated, deputized investigators. The whole thing has an element of sort of surreal comedy to black comedy, so to speak. I don't mean black in the racial sense, of course. With Tucker, I end up saying, look, I have to bow out of the attempt to psychologize this guy. I just don't know. What I do know, it's dividing MAGA. It's bad for Trump. Ultimately, it's playing into the hands of not only the radical jihadis abroad, but also the cultural left in this country. This is something that I think we in the mainstream of the conservative movement have to politely say, but firmly say no to.
Yeah, I mean, I'll just say one more thing about Tucker, and then we can move on. When I first started hearing his positions, my sort of charitable take was that this was stemming from his bent for isolationism, right? So in the way that, hey, I don't think, I'm speaking as him now, I don't think we should be bothering with Ukraine. That's not our borders. Let's worry about our borders. He was applying the exact same logic for Israel. And I may agree or disagree with him, but he is being consistent using a set of principles. But then that charitable interpretation of his positions suddenly no longer made sense to me. So I'll leave it at that. What are some things in making the dragon's prophecy surprised you, either positively or negatively? So, example, you thought you knew what unimaginable depravity was until you saw the footage, and boy, did that surprise you, or vice versa. Give us some sense of things that someone who is as seasoned as you was left speechless and in awe.
So we go down to Israel to film. It was kind of interesting because we picked 9 days to do it. It was not easy to go there because for much of this time, there's a war going on. The airport's closed. We got a 9-day window. We slipped in, we slipped out, and we picked the right time to go. So our friends all say to us, Dinesh, there's a war going on over there. Are you sure you want to go? I'm like, well, yeah, we're going to go. And then they go, don't go down to Gaza. And we're like, oh, of course not. We're not crazy. We're not going to go down to Gaza. Sure enough, we go down to Gaza. And so I'm right now at the kibbutzes on the Gaza border, which is really where the terrorists came. This is a kibbutz called Nahal Oz. I'm talking to a woman, Lishai Miran. Her husband is Omri Miran, young guy, 2 small kids. And he was kidnapped and dragged, away to Gaza. Hopefully he's coming back. He's coming back to his family, reunited with this. So this is a personal element for me. But here's the point. I'm talking to Lisha. We're standing outside in her front yard, and we can actually hear these bombs going off. We can hear the machine gun fire because Gaza is like a football field away. So there's fighting going on right behind us. You can hear it in the film. Now, she starts talking about the fact that they heard these rockets, and so her family rushed into there. They have a safe room and they locked themselves in. But then the terrorists came in through the window. And then they tried to bang on the door, but they couldn't get in. So they go next door and they have a teenage kid. So they bring the teenage kid, put a gun to his head, and he talks to them in Hebrew. He says, please open the door. They're going to shoot me if you don't open the door, and then they're going to kill you. So, of course, the distraught family opens the door. Now, as I'm talking to her, I realize that I have the actual footage of what happened. In other words, this is a rare case, right? As a filmmaker, I'm interviewing someone, they'll say something, and then I make a decision. Do I want to recreate that event so that the audience has a more vivid perception of what happened? But in this case, I don't have to recreate it. Hamas filmed it, and I have the film. So in the film itself, in this documentary, you see her talking, and I'm showing you exactly what happened while she's telling you. She says, these four monsters came in through the window. There are the four monsters. You can see them going in through the window. She says they kept banging on the door. You see them bang. So this to me was really from my, just as someone who has been, I didn't go to film school. This is, I think, my 8th or 9th documentary, but we have gotten better at it. And in this case, we had just this riveting footage that brings the whole thing to life. And that's what a good film does, right? I've tried even in my earlier films like 2000 Mules. I don't want to just lecture you about election fraud. I want to show you what happened at a Dropbox in Atlanta, on so-and-so night at 1:13 a.m. in the morning. I'll put you there on the scene, and the same here. So this film has that gritty quality. And so when it's woven through with these larger sort of historical and biblical themes, it nevertheless remains firmly grounded in actual events.
Beautiful. You modestly started your response to my last question by saying, I didn't go to film school. You know who else didn't go to film school? Steven Spielberg. So I think you should wear that as a badge of honor. Hey, Dinesh, I know we're about to wrap up here. I know that today we're talking about the Dragon's Prophecy. By the way, let me repeat again the URL, the Dragon's Prophecy Film.com. Correct? Did I get that right?
That's it. The Dragons, plural, the Dragons Prophecy Film.com. That's it.
Yeah, so go check that out. Do you already have the next project, if you can share it with us, locked and loaded in that beautiful mind of yours?
God, no. What I do is I allow myself a little period of ferment. I throw myself into these projects, and then I ask myself, like, what is the next place to go here? Because certain thoughts come out of this film itself, right? There are a lot of young people, for example, who have become sort of deracinated or uprooted from the principles of Western civilization. And so I've been talking to some of my friends at Prager University. I'm like, I wonder if you'd like me to make like a series of videos on like the core. I did a series for them, by the way, a couple of years ago on the 5 key figures of the American founding, like picking out the main idea of Madison, the main idea of Franklin, the main idea of Hamilton. So I'm like, maybe I should do this for 2 dozen of the key figures of the West. So this is kind of how my mind works. Like what is the next place to go from here? And then I try to think of a project for me that makes sense.
I would say, and then we'll say goodbye online and then offline. What strikes me about you, and I think that came across in some of our previous discussions, is that you really do embody one of the principles that I talk about in my previous book, in the happiness book, when I'm talking about occupational happiness, I basically say that any occupation that allows you to immerse yourself within the creative impulse is one that's going to lead to purpose and meaning. Right now, you could be a chef and create new dishes. You could be an architect, create new structures. You could be a stand-up comic and create new, funny routines. But all of these people, while coming from completely different backgrounds and different industries, share one thing in common. They're creating something from nothing. And you certainly embody that. Would you say that one of the reasons, now you might be just someone who has a sunny disposition, but do you feel that you wake up in the morning and rub your hands in anticipation for the day because much of what you do all day is create?
I would say that I have tried to maintain some of that childhood sense of wonder that I felt as a boy. Um, that was very much reinforced when I first set foot at Dartmouth. I just looked at the place and I felt like this is a place where my mind is going to be sort of expanded. It's going to open up, and it is. And then I said to myself, I have to find a way to take this sort of sense of wonder and figure out how to make a productive and hopefully not too poverty-stricken career based upon doing this kind of work. And I've actually been able to do that. I'm actually one of the few people who have taken my liberal arts education and built a career directly on top of it, and I'm doing it still to this day.
Bless you, buddy. Stay on the line so we could say offline. So we say goodbye offline. Thank you so much. The Dragon's Prophecy. Go check it out, people. Thank you for coming on for the third time, Dinesh. Cheers, buddy.
It's my pleasure.